Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The Whitlock family gathered in the narrow yard as a pale haze crept between the houses. East Hollow Township, 1943. Eleanor Whitlock swore the afternoon light felt wrong that day, as if the sun itself was holding its breath. Little Mary, the girl with the ribboned braids, kept glancing over her shoulder, saying she heard Aunt Lorna whispering, even though Aunt Lorna had died the previous winter. Samuel, the eldest boy, clutched a paper in his hand, claiming it fluttered on its own like something unseen was tugging at it. Behind them, Patriarch Harold Whitlock stood unusually stiff, his eyes unfocused, as though he were listening to a voice no one else could hear. And when the shutter clicked, several of them later swore they felt an extra presence brushing past their legs. Cold, small, and searching for someone who wasn't there anymore. The Hollow Creek hiking group posing beneath the autumn canopy as a silent child peers from behind the tree. Hollow Creek Woods, 1987. They said the woods were safe that day. Yet Marla Jensen kept feeling a draft at her back, cold enough to raise goosebumps even in the warm October sun. Young Tommy Briggs, the boy with the slingshot in his pocket, whispered that someone small kept following them, ducking behind trunks but never making a sound. When the photo was developed, the pale figure of a child, later dubbed Little Ezra, after an old local legend, appeared between Karen Holt and Denise Miller, his face sharp and watching, though no child had stood there. The adults tried to laugh it off, but none could explain the way the leaves seemed to sway around that spot in perfect stillness. And to this day, those who return to Hollow Creek swear they sometimes hear an extra pair of footsteps padding softly behind the group, always just out of sight. Arthur LeClaire, pausing with his daughter beside the pram as a pale-faced child watches from the hedge. Blackthorne Garden, Surrey, 1939. Arthur remembered hearing soft rustling behind him, though the shrubs hadn't been moving in the breeze. Little Clara kept glancing over her shoulder, frowning as if someone were whispering her name from the greenery. When the photograph came back, the figure of a boy, later identified only in family lore as Peter of the Garden, a child said to have died on the property decades earlier, stood half hidden in the leaves, his expression strangely intent. Arthur swore no other child had been there. Yet the air around the hedge had felt unnaturally cold, even under the warm afternoon sun. And neighbors claimed that for weeks after, they heard tiny footsteps padding along the garden path at dusk, stopping just outside the LeClaire gate. Siblings Elsie and Rowan Harbridge resting on the felled stump as a silent man stands watching from the ridge. Fernwood Timber Trail, Victoria, 1913. Elsie later insisted she heard someone humming among the trees, a low and wavering tune that didn't match any bird call she knew. Rowan, usually fearless, kept his eyes fixed on the ridge, claiming a man in work clothes had been standing there long before the dogs wandered up the path. Yet their mother, who took the photo, swore she saw no one besides the children and the animals. No figure, no shadow, no movement at all. When the image was developed, the man appeared clearly, arms crossed, posture stiff, face turned slightly downward as though studying the children. Locals whispered it resembled Henry Morrow, a logger crushed by a fallen trunk years earlier, a man said to roam the forest still, watching over trails that no longer remember his name. The abandoned room beneath Ashwick Manor revealing a faint face forming inside the old hearth. Ashwick, Somerset, 1968. When Thomas Gray first stepped into the cellar, the air felt unnaturally warm, as if a fire had been smoldering there moments before, despite decades of neglect. Locals had long whispered that a servant named Eliza Harrow was burned alive inside that very hearth, her screams swallowed by stone and secrecy. As Thomas approached, a soft glow pulsed from the blackened opening, and the outline of a face, hollow-eyed, mouth twisted in silent agony, seemed to rise within the soot. The camera flash caught it for only an instant, a human countenance pressed against the darkness like someone trying to breathe through it. And ever since, visitors claim the hearth exudes a faint heat, as though whatever smolders inside still hasn't finished dying. Edward Mallory posing with little Anna and her doll as a blurred, unnatural haze clings to the child's face. Brierford Studio, Yorkshire, 1891. Edward had insisted the portrait be quick. The studio felt too cold, too quiet, as though something else were waiting in the dimness behind the backdrop. Anna, normally cheerful, grew restless in his lap, repeatedly glancing to her left as if someone stood just outside the frame. When the plate was developed, her face appeared doubled and distorted, like two expressions struggling to occupy the same moment, while the doll in her arms seemed to slump as though suddenly lifeless. Locals later whispered that the blur resembled the face of Edward's first daughter, Clara, who had died a year prior and was said to cling to her surviving sister with desperate longing. And ever since, Brierford Studio gained a reputation. Children photographed there cried of cold hands on their shoulders, even when no one was near enough to touch them. Professor Lionel Gratham, seated beside Margaret Ellery and Dr. James Whitcomb, as a blurred visage forms above Margaret's dissolving face. Wexford Hall, London, 1922. They gathered for what was meant to be a simple commemorative portrait. Yet Margaret had felt uneasy from the moment she sat between the two men, claiming the chair beneath her felt recently occupied. As the photographer adjusted the lens, Lionel noticed Margaret's features flicker, as though her face were trying to slip away from her own skin. When the plate was finally exposed, the result was horrifying. Margaret's face appeared smeared into an almost liquid blur, and above her hovered a pale, cloud-like shape resembling the head of a woman with sunken eyes. Rumors quickly revived the tale of Eleanor Price, the former mistress of Wexford Hall, who had died in that room and was said to resent any woman taking her place. And long after this photograph was taken, visitors claimed the seat Margaret sat in always felt warm, too warm, as if someone unseen had refused to rise from it. A tall, blurred figure rising beside the chair, as if stepping out of the darkness itself. Langford Curiosity Shop, Kent, 2009. They said the shop was quiet after midnight. Yet owner Martin Hale always felt as though someone paced between the shelves long after closing. On the night this CCTV frame was captured, a soft scraping sound echoed near the card stand, though no one else was inside. As the motion sensor flicked on, the camera recorded a narrow, human-shaped silhouette lifting from the floor, as if unfolding itself after years of being curled in shadow. Locals whispered it resembled Edith Langford, the shop's first proprietor, who was rumored to have died alone in the back room and never left her post. And since this image surfaced, customers swear the chair in the corner sometimes rocks on its own. Slowly, rhythmically, as though someone invisible sits down to watch them browse. A childlike face forming in the brush beside the old gravestones. Willow Cemetery, Tennessee, 1954. Caretaker Samuel Dyer had always avoided the far corner of the cemetery, claiming the air there felt too crowded, even on windless days. When he passed through at dusk, he heard what sounded like a small breath coming from the undergrowth, soft and trembling, as if someone were trying not to cry. The photograph taken that evening revealed the impossible. The pale, sorrowful face of a child emerging from the thicket, eyes fixed on the tombstone as though waiting for someone who never returned. Locals whispered it was the spirit of Lily Crane, a girl who vanished in the woods nearly a century earlier and whose grave had remained unmarked until this very stone was placed. And those who visit the cemetery after dark report a faint tug at their sleeves. Gentle, hesitant, like a lost child trying to take their hand. A pale figure standing beyond the tree line, as though watching over the polished gravestones. St. Mariefeld Cemetery, Bavaria, 1996. They said the cemetery was empty that morning, the mist still clinging to the grass like a thin shroud. Yet when Helga Bauer laid flowers on her parents' grave, she felt an odd pressure behind her, as though someone tall had stepped into view. Later, in the photograph she took, a faint human shape appeared on the ridge beyond the stones, its posture rigid, its face blurred into a soft, ghost-white oval. Locals murmured it resembled Franz Adler, a groundskeeper who died decades earlier and was rumored never to have left his post, wandering the border of the cemetery at dawn. And those who visit at first light sometimes claim they see a figure standing exactly where Franz once watched, silent, unmoving, waiting for the living to notice him. The abandoned boiler room, where a shadowed figure is said to linger between the pillars. Hollowgate Asylum, Norfolk, 1937. They said the basement was sealed after the asylum closed. Yet workers who passed by swore they heard someone pacing slowly beneath the floorboards. When Elias Trumbell descended with a lantern to document the ruins, he felt an immediate shift in the air, like someone exhaling right beside his ear. The soot-stained pillars seemed to bend the darkness around them. And in the far recess, just beyond the arch, Elias thought he saw a thin silhouette leaning against the wall, watching him with hollow patience. Locals believe it's the spirit of Nurse Adeline Mott, who vanished during a winter blackout and was rumored to have been locked in the boiler room by a violent patient. And to this day, anyone who lingers too long in that cellar reports a faint tapping along the pipes, as if she's still trying to signal for help. Long after the world stopped listening, a faint, child-sized figure standing halfway up the stairwell, as though waiting to be noticed. Brindleworth Orphan Home, Glasgow, 1978. No one remembered hearing footsteps on the stairs that night. Yet several guests later admitted they felt a sudden drop in temperature as they passed the old entryway. When Alan McCreary turned to speak to the group, he sensed someone small standing just behind him. Quiet, patient, almost hopeful. The photograph revealed what the eye could not. A pale, blurred form of a child on the steps, its face tilted slightly upward as if trying to meet Alan's gaze. Locals whispered it was the lingering spirit of Thomas Barclay, a boy who vanished from the orphan home decades earlier and was never found. And ever since this image surfaced, visitors claim the staircase creaks only on the lower steps, lightly, rhythmically, like a lost child still waiting for someone to finally come back for him. A pale, mask-like face staring down from the attic crawlspace, Maritan Boarding House, Ohio. 2003. Tenants had complained for months about soft dragging sounds in the ceiling, but no one ever found rats or wiring loose enough to explain the noise. On the night this photo was taken, Lydia Marsh climbed onto a chair to check the crawlspace, certain she'd find nothing more than dust and insulation. Instead, the darkness above shifted, revealing a long, narrow face, white as plaster, hollow-eyed, watching her from the void with unnatural stillness. Locals later connected the sighting to Gerald Pike, a reclusive former tenant rumored to have vanished into the attic decades earlier, leaving no trace except the smell of old clothing and a locked room no one could open. And even now, new residents say they sometimes wake to faint scratching above their beds, followed by the unmistakable sensation of someone leaning down to listen through the ceiling. A pale, watchful face peering from the window as the couple poses outside the old timber house. Stratford upon Avon, Warwickshire, 1998. They said the house had stood since the 1600s, its beams soaked with more history than any guidebook dared to print. When Daniel and Elise stopped for a cheerful photo with their dog, neither noticed the faint shift of movement behind the warped glass. Only later did the image reveal a thin, sallow face staring from the window, its expression blank, its eyes too fixed, too still, as if it hadn't blinked in centuries. Locals whispered it was the lingering presence of Elias Crowhurst, a former resident rumored to have gone mad during a winter plague and locked himself inside until the town forgot he existed. And even now, Passers-by claim they sometimes catch a pale silhouette drifting behind those same ribbons of old window panes, watching the street with a patience that no living thing should possess. A tall, shrouded figure appearing beside the milestone as the family smiles into the night. San Ignacio outskirts, Yucatan, 2011. They thought they were only taking a quick picture before heading home. The warm night filled with nothing more unsettling than insects humming in the grass. But moments before the flash, little Mateo tugged at his sister's sleeve, whispering that someone was standing by the stone and watching. When the photo was developed, a pale figure in a long gown appeared beside the old milestone. Tall, still, and facing the children, as though it had been there long before they arrived. Villagers later said it matched the stories of La Dama del Camino, a woman who died on that road generations ago and was said to wander the fields searching for the family she lost. And to this day, travelers passing that milestone claim they sometimes see a white shape drifting just out of the headlights, waiting, watching, unwilling to let the living leave so easily. A gray, time-worn face watching from the upstairs window during the family's graduation photo. Pinerest Heights, Virginia, 1994. They remembered the day as bright and ordinary, the kind of afternoon when nothing strange should cling to the air. But when the photo came back, the celebration froze under a new shadow. The faint outline of an elderly woman staring from the second-floor window, her features rigid, her eyes fixed directly on the graduate. Neighbors whispered it looked like Eleanor Price, the home's original owner, who died alone inside the same room decades earlier and was said to resent strangers filling the house she never truly left. The family insisted no one had been upstairs, yet for weeks afterward they heard slow, dragging footsteps crossing that empty room long after midnight. And sometimes, when the curtains shift on their own, they swear a pale figure stands just behind them, watching the yard as if searching for the moment she was forgotten. A blurred, crawling figure emerging from the hollowed monument as though climbing out of the grave itself. Old Brierton Cemetery, Massachusetts, 1911. They said the stone marker had been sealed for decades, ever since it was placed over the unclaimed remains of a vagrant known only as Silas Crow. Locals avoided it, insisting strange sounds, scratching, shuffling, wet breaths, came from the narrow aperture carved into its front. When this photograph was taken, the air around the monument reportedly turned icy, and the grass flattened as if something heavy were dragging itself forward. In the developed image, a distorted, semi-transparent body appears to be crawling out of the stone, limbs stretched unnaturally long, as though Silas himself were forcing his way back into the world he once haunted. And ever since that day, visitors claim they never linger near the marker. Because sometimes, if you stand too close, you can feel fingers brushing the back of your ankles, searching for a way out. A pale, smoky face forming behind the curtain as the couple poses in the warm lamplight. Alderbrook Flats, Minnesota, 2017. They remembered the evening as calm and ordinary, a quiet moment captured on a cheap, instant camera. But when the film developed, something else had been caught in the frame. Something neither of them sensed while sitting together. Behind the curtain, just above the young man's shoulder, a ghostly face seemed to materialize out of drifting smoke. Sunken eyes, a sharp jawline, and a faint curl of breath, like someone exhaling from the dark. Neighbors said it resembled Caleb Rowan, a troubled tenant who died in that apartment years earlier and was rumored to lurk near the curtains where he used to hide during his worst nights. And since this photo surfaced, the couple swears they sometimes hear a soft inhale behind the fabric, timed perfectly to the rhythm of a breath that no living person is taking. A dim, child-sized figure sitting quietly on the chair behind the guitarist. Stonebridge Apartments, London, 2008. It was meant to be a simple recording session, just Marcus Bennett strumming through a new melody while a friend snapped a few casual photos. Yet, halfway through the song, Marcus felt a sudden chill at his back, the kind that makes your fingers falter on the strings. When the picture developed, a small, grayish silhouette appeared perched on the old wooden chair. A figure with a round head and thin shoulders, sitting perfectly still as though listening intently. Neighbors later said it resembled Oliver Pike, a young boy who died in the building decades earlier and was often heard humming softly in the stairwell after dark. And ever since this image surfaced, Marcus refuses to practice alone. Because sometimes, when the room falls silent, he hears a faint tapping on the chair behind him, perfectly in time with the song he never finished playing. A pale, contorted face forming in the wood grain above the hall stand. Marrowgate Antique Shop, Bristol, 2014. They said the piece came from an old manor that burned in the 1930s, its surviving furniture reeking faintly of smoke even after decades. When the shopkeeper brought the hall stand into the back room, every dog that entered refused to go near it, growling low at the polished panels as though something inside were breathing. In this photograph, a twisted face seems to rise out of the wood grain, eyes hollow, mouth warped mid-scream. Its features align too perfectly to be just reflection or stain. Locals whispered it might be Agatha Rowell, the manor's former mistress, who was rumored to have perished trapped behind a locked door as the fire consumed the upper floor. And since the hall stand arrived, staff swear they sometimes hear a faint knocking within its panels, slow, desperate, like someone still trying to escape the flames carved into the wood. A hunched, shadow-dark figure crouching between the bookshelves as the library sits empty. Pine Hollow Public Library, Ohio, 2003. The security camera was only meant to monitor late afternoon foot traffic. Yet, staff had long whispered that something moved through the aisles after closing. At 3:41 p.m., the building should have been buzzing with patrons. But instead, a single black shape appeared between the yellow shelves, low to the floor, its outline too defined to be a trick of light and too human to dismiss. Librarian Dana Kessler claimed she heard soft shuffling at that exact moment, like someone crawling rather than walking, though she was alone in the room. Locals later linked the figure to Evan Marsh, a reclusive former custodian who disappeared inside the library decades earlier. Rumored to sleep between the stacks during the stormy nights he feared going home. And ever since this footage surfaced, workers say that sometimes, when the lights are dimming, they hear whispered breathing rising from the carpet, slow, rhythmic, as if something still waits for the last visitor to leave. And so, these final images remind us that the past never truly leaves us. It lingers in forgotten rooms, behind old curtains, between the shelves, watching, waiting, breathing through the cracks of time. If these shadows made you shiver, imagine what still lies unseen. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone brave enough to watch until the end. Because the next story might be the one that follows you.